Surf is trying to destroy Lauren Southern. What is this?
From the Doors, did you hear that?
Lauren Southern's
The locks
greatest
have been
lie.
removed from the Doors. Locks, like deadbolts.
Not really.
Really hungry, haven't eaten, and just please give me a call when the food is coming.
What is this? This is not a parody.
Immediately, they just start asking questions.
Why would tribal chiefs be stating these were overgrown graveyards?
And then she sprinkles in a little dose of conspiracy theory.
And all before an election. Things were simply not adding up.
To lead us into a drone-laden intro. Lauren and Keen display their complete bewilderment that tribal chiefs and residential school survivors have no interest in talking to them, especially when a cursory Google search will reveal that Lauren has previously held interviews with such prestigious figures as Faith Goldy.
Of our people and a future for white children.
Yeah.
Is that controversial though? Like I don't see that's controversial. Is that bad? Like, I think it's controversial to say the opposite.
You cannot. Holocaust denier, member of the Identity.
I feel like if anybody could rehabilitate Lauren Southern's image, I feel like the best possible thing that could happen to her would be Lance trying to attack her because he's actually so fucking stupid that I think she could actually rebuild off the backs of his critiques on her.
Movement, Martin Sellner.
No, but I think you're much fierce than many of the activists I know. But you're right, of course, it's a dangerous mission.
And Alexander Dugin, the founder of the National Bolsheviks Party, aka the Nazbols.
Normality today is matriarchy, feminism, LGBT, broadening.
How much do I want to get into this? This narrative is actually really scary. If Lance wanted to attack Lauren Southern, it shouldn't be for interviewing these people. It should be for agreeing with these people. There shouldn't necessarily be a problem with interviewing edgy or crazy people, right? Like, there might be a problem here if you put forth the argument that like, oh, Lauren Southern is in league with these people or agrees with these people, then sure. But like, Lauren Southern interviews like far right people, I think you need to take it a step farther to show that as being like problematic.
Experience with drugs and so on. That is normal. That is almost obligatory for millennials.
There's actually several scenes of them mistaking people not wanting anything to do with them as potential cover-ups of something more sinister.
What are they hiding? Like, why are they so afraid to talk to media?
We've given them a month actually, and they're satisfied with the status quo. So that's the story, right? They're happy with you being misled.
Lauren is further confused when members of the local church won't comment immediately on a highly charged issue with a stranger who has only identified herself as a journalist named Lauren.
This topic, I literally hear like the soul leave their body when I ask about the church attacks or the residential school.
No one will talk to them, which surely can only mean that there's something else going on here. Which means it's as good a time as any to visit one of the actual grave sites and be as respectful as they can be by following the rules. No drone use, live streaming, video recording, photography. That noise.
To launch the drone, to fly it over this area that a lot of people don't want to be seen for whatever reason.
GPR scan, which presumably
These are so... Oh, I don't even know if I can watch this. I don't want to sound like I'm simming for Lauren Southern. These are not good critiques. Like, that's like, do you see how disrespectful the Vice reporters are? All sorts of signs up in Xinjiang or whatever saying, please do not film here. Please don't worry about what's happening to the Uyghurs. Don't carry a camera here. But like, what? Why would you... like, no shit. If somebody calls himself an investigative journalist, the first place they're going to go to is places where there are signs saying, don't film. Well, of course.
led to these flag markings was done by Dr. Sarah Bollier, who has since stated her findings are simply preliminary and cannot be confirmed yet.
In the following slides, I will call the targets of interest probable burials as they demonstrate multiple GPR characteristics of burials, but only forensic investigation with excavation will be able to conclusively determine this.
Now, Lauren only plays about 15 seconds of Dr. Sarah Bollier's 18-minute presentation and ignores the bulk with purpose, which is too bad because she does an excellent job explaining her methodology. GPR alone wasn't used to determine the presence of the bodies. The child's rib bone they'd found had already done that.
Part of the reason these 2 acres out of 160 were selected for this GPR survey was because a juvenile rib bone and a tooth were discovered.
In fact, the GPR wasn't used to detect organic matter at all. It was used to figure out exactly how large this particular unmarked graveyard of children was. That was combined with additional information such as accounts of survivors, historical documents, school records, and other testimonies to form a case. It's detective work and combines many of the tools of modern archaeology. Most importantly is the fact that the idea of missing and murdered Indigenous children is not new. It's been widely established by thousands of interviews in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The survivors of this cultural genocide are still alive today.
For me, it is very hard to talk about it. I didn't even talk about the abuse in residential schools to my children. And today they're shocked to hear all what is happening, especially finding of the babies. Many of our children who ran away during the winter and froze to death on their way home. And the IELTS, the black robes, start lying.
Wasn't Destiny the first one on the left to bring her back into the fold? I didn't bring anybody back. Here's what I don't understand, okay? I spent years arguing with lefties, and then everybody cries and complains when I argue with lefties, okay? So now I have to go and find conservatives, but now when I find conservatives, people cry and complain about that too. What am I supposed to do? I feel like the problem is that, like, you guys don't actually give a fuck. When I say you guys, I mean like you, Jason, Society, Chat. You guys don't actually give a fuck like who I talk to or what I debate or who I'm bringing into the fold. You don't care about any of that shit. You just want me to be a socialist. And anything like less than that is like you get ass mad over it. Like, fuck off.
About the children. Oh yeah, they're doing fine here. In the meantime, they were missing. And no one had searched for them.
Nevertheless, the fact that she skips over the presentation can be forgiven as they state their next step will be to speak to an expert on the subject.
Some of those markers are like weirdly close to each other.
Now, what we need to do is speak to an expert on ground penetrating radar and see if that level of preciseness is accurate, or are they just putting stakes in the ground?
2 weeks later. Turns out, rather than speak to any experts, Keane has his own research he seems very confident about.
From the Journal of Applied Geophysics. This was from 2009.
Using the abstract of a study, aka the part before the introduction, they conclude that GPR technology often leads to incorrect results.
So yeah, one of those things that was repeated by almost every study and every expert, even the experts who did some of the research on these graves, was it cannot detect organic matter.
Yeah, no shit. GPR isn't a corpse machine. It detects anomalies in the soil. So for instance, if you dug a shallow grave and put a body in there and filled it with soil, it would detect a depression present that would appear different than had nothing happened at all.
But it wouldn't see a pile of bodies that has been there for 60...
This is true. Man, it sure would be cool if Lance knew all of this for his debate with Lauren instead of having to make a Cope video like 5 months later. I think Lance literally learned this in real time during his debate.
70, 80 years. It's just not how GPR works.
Right. Yeah. From what I've seen, looking at some of the studies available online, really it'll just show you anomalies in the ground. And this is even what Sarah Bellier...
It's at this stage that I'd like to point out that the description of our video contains a grand total of 0 links to any studies or reports, making it difficult to determine if she's read material on GPR or cereal boxes that have the letter G on them. Nevertheless, we found the study that Keane referenced and read as far as the conclusion, which states, our investigation showed that GPR surveys are useful tools for identifying unmarked graves, and that the probability of detecting their correct location is very high under conditions mentioned in this paper. Even in the abstract itself, if they had just read past the first paragraph, they'd realize that GPR is intended to be compared with soil and vegetation properties of the sites examined. Which again, if they had played more than 5 seconds of Dr. Sarah Bollier's presentation, they'd realize she did.
With regards to determining number of graves, as I went through on the slides, it was ruling out different anomalies, such as root systems, stones, rocks, anything else under the surface that didn't present as a potential burial. When you have a juvenile burial, because they are smaller in length, they typically are not dug as deeply. So the length would have been taken into account in addition to the depth of the burial as well.
The Smoking Gun Finale, being the largest unmarked gravesite found near former Saskatchewan residential school, wasn't a mass grave at all.
These graves in Saskatchewan were apparently marked in the 60s. This was not a mass grave. It was a graveyard.
Yeah. Lauren. No shit.
I feel like I've outpaced him.
Wait, but that's the whole point. The whole point on this is like nobody calls graveyards mass graves. That's the point. You're implying something so much different.
News story never said it was a mass grave.
You're Canadian. I'm American, and even I know that all the talk about this shit hasn't been about graveyards that have been lost. It's been about mass graves. This has been a huge Canadian Indigenous person's talking point for months. It's not just graveyards, it's mass graves, mass grave, mass grave, mass grave, genocide, mass graves.
Even the fucking headline. That again, using a combination of information provided by historical data, GPR, and even the goddamn Archdiocese of Regina, had revealed several of the graves had been bulldozed.
Firstly, a rogue priest with a bulldozer is not an intentional cover-up by the Catholic Church.
They never said it was a cover-up, just that it was literally covered up, like you're inventing your own
Wait, what's the point of saying that? Is Lance trying to now walk back to nobody ever made the claim that people were intentionally covering things up. They just said that it happened to get cover up. Well, that was the whole point of the initial claims. Right?
Conspiracy theory to have to debunk on top of proving your point. You even mentioned that the graveyard had started 13 years before the school opened. Again, no one is disputing that. It doesn't justify if children died at a residential school and were then buried in a gravesite that had their markers bulldozed because they didn't care.
You can't just rely on a couple squiggly lines to condemn a nation of genocide. That's not how it works. That's not what the science says. But time and time again, we see journalists misreading science. They don't know what they're talking about. They claim they do, but they're lying.
So, there's so much to unpack here, and unfortunately, I won't have time to do it properly.
Then why are you making a video? Wait, why would you include a quote? Why would you include a quote where you're saying there's a lot to unpack, but you don't have time to do it? That's not true. You actually have so much time because this is prepared content. This is a pre-recorded video. You have literally as much time as you want. Well, I think 12 hours is the maximum upload time. Oh no, you can do longer because it's a pre-recorded video. It's not a stream. You have so much time.
The accusation of cultural genocide against the government of Canada has already been established through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was a multi-million-dollar investigation that had thousands of witnesses, testimonies, and conclusively determined that Canada intentionally enacted a program of cultural genocide against Indigenous peoples. This is in addition to the National Inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women that also found the country to be guilty of cultural genocide. Both inquiries proposed multiple calls to action, from ending the widespread separation of children from their Indigenous parents, to reserves not even having enough clean drinking water, to address the ongoing problems, and very few of these calls to actions have been met.
I like how he layers the fucking music. God, dude, he was actually so gross. Oh my God, he's so fucking disgusting, dude. Oh God.
So, there you have it. Well, almost it. You see, remember when I said you should put a pin in what Lauren's definition of what a mass grave is? Well, that's because in the actual UN declaration itself, it clearly states that there is no clear definition of what they actually are. Now, I know it's pedantic to argue about definitions, but again, in your
just reading the rest.
No clear definition of what they actually are. Now, I know it's pedantic to argue about definitions, but again, in your own example, if you just read past the first line, you'd learn several definitions of mass graves have been offered. From a scientific perspective, a mass grave contains two or more bodies that are in contact with each other. After all, it's archaeologists who are the ones examining the sites and using the definition openly. And better yet, that they don't have to be the result of extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions, but can be from not having died in combat or armed confrontations. Like, holy hell, you highlighted it. At least read it next time. Oh, and you know how you said you were going to talk to an expert, but then just didn't? Well, I did. I spoke to several, in fact, like Jonathan Driver, professor of archaeology from Simon Fraser University, who says, and I quote, "What we do know is that GPR can detect anomalies in the soil and that this technology has been used to successfully find unmarked graves. And we also know that children did die at residential schools because there are records of this. And we know that GPR anomalies have been found around residential schools that require further investigation. Oh, and I also spoke to the manufacturing company that makes the technology used inside GPR devices."
How do you counter misinformation? In a word, it's total BS. I mean, it's used all the time for this application. I don't know how else you counter that other than to say, talk to the police who are using it, talk to the researchers who are using it. Now, most of the time, bodies that have been buried for years or decades or hundreds of years are long since dewatered and decayed and everything like that. And they're extremely difficult to find with GPR. In fact, you probably wouldn't be able to find them with GPR. But what you can find is things associated with the burial. So things like somebody had to dig a hole to bury the body, and therefore the soil was disturbed. And you can never put the soil back into a hole the same way it came out. Finding one body buried somewhere is very, very difficult. Right? The police run into that all the time with cold cases. Is how do you tell? Because GPR can be very confusing and all this. But when you have basically an unmarked cemetery, which is the situation with the residential schools, then you pick up patterns. When you scan an area, you start to see, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't look totally natural. This is a pattern.
I mean, it sure would damage your entire thesis if it turned out that these exact same techniques of combining GPR data with other information such as historical records had been used to exhume bodies years after they had been buried. You know, like in Tampa Bay, where the remains of over 50 boys were exhumed after having been successfully located with the assistance of ground-penetrating radar over 70 years after the bodies had been buried. I guess your last remaining shred of dignity could hinge on the fact that these weren't exactly residential schools or indigenous children being exhumed. Unlike the Carlisle Indian Boarding School, one of the oldest residential schools in the United States that opened in 1831 and closed in 1970, and the work of Clint King, who again combined the use of ground-penetrating radar with other information to locate and track indigenous children that were buried there. And if that isn't all, here's the bodies having been exhumed from the ground and returned to their ancestral homes, you goddamn ghoul, over 100 years later.
But it wouldn't see a pile of bodies that has been there for 60, 70, 80 years. It's just not how GPR works.
Yes, that's right, Ronald McDonald with whiteface on. I haven't forgotten about you. It's actually so rich that you would want to talk about genocide and hoaxes because ground-penetrating radar has been used to find Jewish mass graves from the goddamn Holocaust. GPR is such a crucial tool used in archaeology at this point that stating that it's unable to find skeletal remains is so ludicrous that it calls into question the entire field itself. I mean, yeah, we had medicine before the fact that we knew about what the germ theory of disease was, or antibiotics. But no one is going to say that we shouldn't use those things today. Like, should we not use chemistry just because we once had alchemy, Lauren? Is that what you want? Fucking alchemy?
Oh god, he's trying to do the H-Bummer guy. If it's on his YouTube, it should be okay on my YouTube, right?
Cannot detect organic matter. Yeah, you said that.
This was a very difficult video to make.
Oh my god, stop acting like it. Dude, I hate white liberals so much. Oh my god, it's so good. This video was so hard to make. He says as he overlays fucking Wagner for 2 minutes while he's getting his sick dunks in. Like, bro, shut the fuck up. You don't give a fuck about any of these people. You wish more died so you could get more fucking content out of it. You're such a disingenuous snake fuck. Jesus Christ.
I don't only mean because I have an indigenous mother or because of how dark the subject matter is, but because it's something that both Canada and the world are just now coming to terms with. Yet it's something that indigenous people have been screaming and begging to be heard on for decades. Many people don't realize that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created as part of a settlement.
Damn, he says he has an indigenous mother. I wonder if he's ever made Elizabeth Warren jokes before. I feel like I remember him doing that, but I don't 100%, so I won't accuse him of it, but...
An agreement, and that the conservative government at the time tried to do everything in their power to delay or stop it. What makes things worse is that even when there's overwhelming amounts of evidence, people like Lauren and person voted most likely to name his mannequins after his mother will deliberately lie and distort the truth to whitewash or hide the horrors and atrocities committed against Indigenous people. So beyond the lesson of don't trust anything Lauren Southern says at face value, the greatest one would be listen to Indigenous voices and storytellers, because theirs are the ones that have been historically silenced.
Oh God. Oh my God. Jesus. Didn't Lauren concede that there was a genocide in the past? That's what I remember. I could be wrong, but I thought Lauren explicitly said, like, yeah, at one point, yeah, you could probably argue there was a genocide. I think she said that, but she was arguing about the ongoing genocide. But I don't remember. It's been a while since I've listened to that.